All right, well, welcome everyone to this latest Veeam webinar installment around owning your data across any cloud. If you have tuned into any of our kind of cloudy webinars over the last, I don't know, 24 months or so, you've probably at least heard myself and David talk about this. I'm Sam Nicholls, Director of Public Cloud Product Marketing, and David, Global Technologist, is joining me today. A few welcome words from you, David.
Yeah, hello everyone. Excited today to talk about Veeam and show you some demos of Veeam backup and replication.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be a little bit of a change to what David and I typically talk about. We are very, very much focused on all things cloud native here at Veeam and AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. And the primary focus of this presentation today is ultimately about the hybrid cloud, because that's the reality that we ultimately live in. Very few organizations are 100% sole sourced on the cloud. We live in a very hybrid reality, and that's all that we're going to be talking about today. So we've got some slides to go through, and then ultimately I'm going to turn you over to David to give you like an all-encompassing demo of ultimately how to own your data in any cloud. Ownership sounds maybe a little bit unclear at the beginning, but by the time that we get to the end of this, I think that we'll have a good understanding of what ownership really is. So moving forward through the slides, let's just take a look at hybrid cloud realities, where they stand today. 92% of organizations have embraced the multi-cloud, right? They are leveraging an on-premises data center or their own private cloud, as well as one or more public cloud offerings, whether that's one of the leading hyperscalers like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or that's a regional service provider. Ultimately, hybrid cloud is here now, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. And when we think of hybrid cloud, like especially from a Veeam perspective, a lot of that is just like, okay, we're going to use the cloud as a target for our backups, and that's hybrid cloud, and that's sure, that's absolutely hybrid cloud. But the cloud has been for a very long time a very, very viable place to run production. So we can see here that 41% of organizations have been running production cloud workloads for at least 1 year, and that number jumps up to like 85% if it's for at least 2 years. So again, the cloud is here and now, and if we want to start to take a look at this from a data protection perspective, but first we're going to understand why folks are moving to the cloud, because we're going to ultimately have to build our data protection to build off of these advantages. So there's so many things that the cloud has to offer. Flexibility, literally hundreds of services to choose from tens of different providers, right? So it doesn't matter if you want, a database, a file share, a VM, some storage, whatever it might be, it's just available. And then it's available very quickly, which brings us up to the next point, which is around speed. You can almost instantly provision that service that you need right there and then. So no more having to call your partner, and then you have to go and find out what solution it is that you want, procure it, get it delivered, install it, manage it, maintain it. It's literally just, I want this service, I want it to be like this, here's my credit card, and it's there, it's done, it's ready to go. And it's also very elastic, right? It easily scales performance and capacity, both up and down. So when we're at a point of burst and we need additional performance or capacity, we can absolutely scale that up. We only pay for it for the time that we need it, and then more importantly, we can scale it back down. So when we're in a position where it is not as high demand, we can scale the cloud back down, and that ultimately leads us to cost. Right? It takes that large capital expenditure and makes that a pay-as-you-go operational expenditure, where you only pay for what you use. And then finally is resilience, right? You can architect up to 11 nines of availability across dozens of global locations with these providers. I'm not saying that that's not impossible from a self-managed, self-maintained infrastructure. You could absolutely do that, but it is very difficult to do, and it is going to cost a lot of money. So again, we ultimately have a lot of reasons why we're moving to the cloud, and we need backup to be able to take advantage of all of these, whether again we're using the cloud as a target for backups, or we're trying to protect the cloud itself. And a lot of folks ask about that from a resiliency perspective, like, do I really need to back it up if I've got 11 nines of availability? The answer is yes, but we'll dive into that in just a little bit. Just finally on the hybrid infrastructure piece, this is from our data protection trends report. We've got about 3 years of historical data here now, and a couple of years of future-looking data. No surprises, physical servers within the data center have been on a pretty significant decline for the last few years and will continue to do so, but ultimately level out. Virtual machines on hosts within your data center, it looks like it's a decline. It's actually remained relatively static. I think that it's actually around a 1% growth there, but it looks like there's a decline because ultimately the adoption of the cloud has just skyrocketed and really diluted that. I mean, you can see that pretty much 50% of workloads are now hosted virtual machines within a cloud provider, whether that is, again, a hyperscaler or a regional service provider. And again, it does absolutely need to be backed up, whether that data is on-prem or in the cloud. It is your responsibility to protect that. And that backup ultimately needs to be able to feed off of that resiliency that we're talking about, right? Okay, sure, you can architect 11 lines of availability, but if corruption were to happen, a ransomware attack, accidental deletion, it's ultimately going, so it's relying on replication between different data sets, whether those are in the same geographic location, different ones. So what happens to one set is going to happen to another. So data in the cloud also needs to be backed up. So if anything like that were to happen, you've always got your way out. David, anything that you want to talk about before we start talking about this more from a data protection standpoint?
Yeah, so one of the important things, excuse me, is looking at making sure that all your data protection solutions can work with the platforms that you're trying to protect. So a lot of ways when you look at like legacy backup and a lot of data protection providers, their solution still is just to use agents. Now, agents have a significant place in trying to do backups, especially when you're trying to protect certain specific applications. But being able to integrate with the actual platforms is critical to be able to go and recover your data easily, and also things like understanding that platform as well. So when you're recovering a workload, it's not just, oh, I need to restore a particular Windows VM or an instance. It's being able to understand all the supporting components with that as well, things like security groups and like ACLs and that kind of thing. So making sure that you're not only able to protect the actual data, but also what makes up the components of that workload is critical.
Absolutely, and that really transitions us nicely into this slide, which is around data protection struggling, right? We've had, backup has been around ever since, we had computers, and there's a number of vendors out there, and on the slide they're called legacy backup here, that have done very, very well with on-premises data centers. You think back to, especially when they were just like physical machines and mainframes with the agent-based approach that David said. And then, we started to evolve into agentless, hypervisor-specific backup as we, adopted virtualization. But when we look at some of the more modern applications, and especially the adoption of the cloud, they're just completely not aware of that environment. And some of the pieces that they need to be aware of just aren't available in the public cloud. So these legacy backup solutions ultimately don't succeed with modern applications. They don't stretch across the cloud successfully. And then we've also got a little bit of a tangent, but the increasing incidence of ransomware and cyber threats. They're not purpose built to deal with those cyber threats. So what we start seeing is folks in hybrid cloud environments will leverage a vendor or a handful of vendors to protect their on-premises workloads. And then they start to turn to platform native, cloud native solutions, sometimes first party from AWS, Azure, Google, sometimes third party, to protect their workloads that they are moving to the cloud or developing and deploying net new in the cloud. And David mentioned that native is important to provide that best-in-class protection. However, we start to run into some challenges there, right? That solution is limited to a single vendor, right? So AWS backup can only back up AWS services. So if I'm using on-prem AWS and Azure, I now have to go get another solution to protect AWS and another one to protect Azure. And that leaves us with a ton of headaches when it comes to management, but also these solutions aren't aware of one another, and they don't talk with one another. And it also locks your data into that platform, right? If you are protecting stuff in AWS and you are only backing it up to AWS, there is no option to recover that elsewhere or migrate it elsewhere. And again, you're just locked into that platform. And ultimately, who knows what's around the corner? We need as much ownership and flexibility over our data's location to be able to adapt to very quickly changing organizational requirements. So what does modern data protection look like in 2022 in a hybrid environment? So you can start to look down here. Very, very cloud-focused things are included in these 9 top reasons, right? Ability to do disaster recovery as a service via a cloud service, the ability to standardize protection of on-premises and IaaS SaaS policies. So folks are using multiple different point products from multiple different vendors that don't talk to one another. But second on the list is ultimately centralized management of all of those. And then a little bit lower down, the ability to move workloads from one cloud to the other, e.g. Amazon to Azure, or the ability to move workloads from on-premises to the cloud. So again, all very cloudy and all being very centered on retention of ownership of our data from a centralized management perspective and from a data locality and portability perspective. So what does a hybrid cloud data protection utopia look like? If we were to have this perfect solution, what are the things that it would need to include? So David kind of already mentioned the first one around the agent piece. We need broad native support, right? So if I need to protect a physical machine, I want a solution that is purpose-built for that physical machine. Same for virtual. If I want to protect RDS in Amazon, and then I want to protect SQL in Azure, or a file share in Amazon, I want backup and recovery that is purpose-built for that, so I can get that best-in-class data protection for that precise service. And again, folks are already doing that. It's just not centralized. It's just incredibly disconnected, which leads us onto the centralized management piece, right? I want to be able to unify all of these under a common control plane and a common policy model to make it very, very easy to manage. I want to completely eliminate all these different tool sets, the fragmented management that are driving efficiencies lower and costs higher. I just want to unify that under that common control plane. And again, have the benefits of multiple different tool sets from a protection standpoint, but from a management standpoint, have the benefits of ultimately one common interface. David, anything that you want to add around management or the agent-based or native support piece?
Yeah, it's certainly from a multi-cloud perspective, it's very difficult to manage infrastructure across all these different platforms. So whether you're running in multiple public clouds, or you've got a mix of public clouds and on-prem, and a mix of physical and virtual and then agent-based, centralized management's very important from that perspective, because it allows you to just manage all the data in one location. So you're not having to essentially, it's a bit of a phrase, but console hop across different platforms to go protect data in different environments. You can manage it all from one location, which makes sure that you're meeting all your compliance and regulatory requirements and that kind of thing. So we'll show you a bit more about that in the demo, but it's important to be able to manage all your data in one place to help you just have that infrastructure in place in the event that you do have a failure and you're not having to figure out where my data is and what am I doing and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So moving on to what else would comprise of this perfect solution is really around ownership and control of data. So we spoke about that platform lock-in, right? You utilize a first-party backup service. Their MO is okay to protect your data, but also to keep your data on that platform, because that's how they make money. But your organization is using that platform as a service to deliver against your business initiatives. Maybe another platform comes along in the future that might better serve your needs. Maybe that's from a performance perspective, might be from a cost perspective, it might be from a data sovereignty perspective. But if you have a solution that again is logged into that platform, you're ultimately going to be hindered from transforming and meeting those new initiatives. So it comes down to ownership and control over data, right? The ability to move data across all of these different infrastructures when you want, how you want, wherever you want, in line with those organizations' needs and requirements. Right. So, a lot of organizations are being, tasked with cloud first initiatives. Anything that's new that is being developed or deployed should be done in the cloud. But we do see data moving out of the cloud and back on premises. And that's really shown in this slide, but nicely right here on the right hand side. You'll see that, we asked the question, have you brought any workloads from a public cloud host to on premises? And more than 50% of folks have. They developed it in the cloud, but they did already plan to run it within the data center. But how do you get that data back to your data center if the cloud provider wants it staying on that platform? Some can 23% with an over rotation. We migrated this service from on premises to the cloud because we thought it was going to meet initiatives X, Y, and Z from cost performance, but it didn't check all the boxes, so we decided to bring it back. Well, again, like what happens if you're stripped of that control? And then, less surprisingly, is during a disaster. Temporarily instantiating in the cloud as a disaster recovery target, we're always going to bring it back on premises anyway. But this is where that ownership piece really starts to come in. Understanding what your responsibilities are, and again, protecting data properly wherever it is, and own from the ability to just do what you want with that data when you need to. And then the final piece is around modular flexibility. Right? There's a number of solutions out there that can claim all of this to varying degrees, but sometimes you have to buy into a big, heavy, expensive platform where you ultimately get components of software and infrastructure that you might not necessarily need. What about having that modular flexibility? So today I only need points A, B, and C, and tomorrow I need to drop point A, but I need to pick up points D and E. Having that ability to just kind of piece it together as your strategy evolves, keep it as lightweight, cost effective as possible, easy to manage, is of incredible importance. And that's really where Veeam comes in. We've had a number of cloud plays over the years, from when we introduced our cloud tiering, capacity tier, archive tier, the ability to back up data to the cloud, to more recently, the ability to protect cloud native workloads in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Kubernetes workloads that live in the cloud. So ultimately, this slide here is just to try and break it down to show exactly what Veeam does when it comes to the cloud and how we deliver that ownership to you. So the first macro segment is the ability to protect, control, and manage cloud data. So that data that is living in the cloud, the ability to protect that, again, with the purpose-built tool set that we need to deliver that best-in-class protection, but then also wrapping it up under that centralized management and delivering the ownership through cloud mobility. And on the right-hand side is being able to leverage the cloud for more traditional reasons, right? Data protection and security. I don't want to have to, manage a ton of storage on premises. I just want to send my backups or my archives to the cloud as a target. So absolutely can allow you to do that. Same from a disaster recovery standpoint, right? Some organizations might not have the ability to, have secondary infrastructure that just sits there idle as and when a disaster may or may not come along. Why don't you just use that for the cloud? And again, from a migrate and modernize perspective, that's just a disaster recovery where we just ultimately never fail it back. So Veeam can absolutely deliver that as well. And again, Dave's going to show you in all the presentation. And then finally is the ransomware protection piece, right? Being able to leverage the cloud as kind of an offsite, somewhat air gap target, but also things like immutability. So that write once, read many capabilities. So once that backup has been committed to that storage media, it cannot be changed, altered, deleted for a specified period of time. And these next couple of slides kind of dive into that, but I think really it's just easier to see it better in action. So I'm going to hand you off to David to give you that demo and walk through kind of the key components that you saw on that slide just there. So David, the ball is coming over to you in just a second, mate. You should have the ability to show your screen.
There we go.
Nice.
Okay, so excited to show you all this. So what you're seeing here is Veeam backup and replication console, and hopefully you can see it all, and it's pretty clear. But first of all, what we have is you see a list of a number of backups, and I'm zoomed in a little bit here, so obviously there's a few scroll bars running around. But what you can see is all the different types of backups that we're protecting, from everything from a Windows agent backup, a Linux agent backup. Also, we've got some vSphere backups, and then we've got our public cloud as well. So we've got like AWS, we've got GCP, and we've also got Azure. And what you'll notice is the actual instance types as well of the public cloud. So we've got some EC2 policies, some AWS RDS, we're backing up our VPC configurations, and the same in Azure as well. We've got some Azure VM policies and Azure SQL. So it's very powerful to manage these backups all from this single pane of glass, as I mentioned. Now, what you'll notice is that I can actually just not only perform some tasks on these backups, so I can go and say, I want to go start this particular backup policy here from Veeam backup and replication. I can go set that off running, and we'll see down here at some point that we'll have some backup tasks running. So I'm now going to go take some backups and snapshots of my instances out in AWS. Now, while that's running, what we can do is look at how easy it is to actually manage all that data. So we have our actual jobs or our policies created. We also, when we're talking about hybrid cloud, I also have some backup copy jobs running here as well. So what I actually do here is I take some backups of some workloads out in AWS and Azure, and then through Veeam backup and replication, I actually do some backup copy jobs. So when you think about the best practices around protecting your data, typically we work to a 3-2-1 rule. So that's 3 copies of your data with across 2 different media types with at least 1 offsite. So typically what you have is you have a production copy of your data, so that's your live data. You then take a backup of that, store that locally so you can restore it quickly, and then you take another copy of that and move it to an offsite location. So what I do is I have, you can see here, I've got a backup copy job called Unify Controller. So I actually run my Unify controller for my house out in AWS. So it's a real life production workload that I'm using Veeam to protect. So I have that live production data. I take a backup of that I store in object storage in AWS, which technically could be classed as offsite, but for me, it's still in the same provider. So that's not really offsite, although it's in a different region. And then I take a backup copy job of that and I bring that back on premises. So I have multiple copies of that. So it's very simple, very powerful, and easy to use. Also, what we have is we also have the ability to, when Sam was talking about how you leverage the native platforms, and he had that slide talking about legacy backup versus native protection. We also use snapshots out in the public cloud. So you can see here across on the right, the different platform types across AWS, Google, and Azure. Now I can actually just perform a restore from my snapshots directly from Veeam backup and replication. I can right click on these snapshots and I can say, I want to go restore these to Amazon. Same down in Azure, I can right click and say, I want to go restore this to Azure. So that's my snapshots. Now I also have copies, offload my backups out to AWS S3 or Azure Blob Storage or whatever platform I'm using. And this is very powerful because what this allows you to do when you're living in a hybrid cloud model is actually recover these workloads to any platform. So for example, if I take my priority workloads here which is my Unify controller, I can actually go and do a recovery of this workload directly to vSphere or Hyper-V. I can go and restore it to other cloud platforms. So I can restore it to Azure, I can restore it to Google. However I want to restore that, I can go restore it to any platform that Veeam supports. Now that's very important when you think about different workload types. Now, for example, this Unify controller, if AWS was to go down or that region was to go down, and we've seen it all before where there's been outages in the public cloud and stuff like that, then I can go and restore this to a different public cloud. So I can go restore this to Azure, for example. And what that actually does is it takes that backup from that Veeam portable data backup that we have. So all our data is encapsulated in what we call VBKs, so Veeam backup files. It's very portable, so it can be read by Veeam backup and replication and recovered to any platform. And we essentially do a conversion. So if you imagine taking a vSphere VM and moving it to AWS, for example, AWS in EC2 are not running vSphere. So on the fly, we do a conversion of that. And that allows us to just go and restore these workloads wherever we want. So I can say, right, I want to do an instant recovery. I can pick my instance. I can then go and choose what vSphere host I want to recover it to. So we can see here, I have a vSphere cluster. I can say, right, I want to go put it on this particular host. What folder do I want it to go in? What resource pool do I want it to go in? So we can break this down even further. So I can go put it in a resource pool that I own. We can click through. We can pick our different data stores, and then we can specify a reason and what we want to actually recover it to. Now, that's very powerful from being able to take this EC2 instance and go and recover it to vSphere. But also what we're able to do is do it the other way. So if I take a look at a vSphere backup, for example, and I have this vSphere workload here, and I've also got another one, I can go and recover that workload on premises. So I can do an instant recovery, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It'll just recover that instantly. It'll live stream the data to a particular vSphere host. Or I can go and restore that to a different cloud platform as well. So from that perspective, I can take any workload of any instance or virtual machine that I'm protecting in my on-premises world and go and recover it to a different cloud platform. So what about if I'm protecting these vSphere workloads and I want to leverage, say, like object storage for off-premises data storage? Well, we have things that we call scale-out backup repository. So if we go down here and we look at our backup infrastructure, our scale-out backup repositories leverage platforms across multiple different types. So we can use local storage to this Veeam backup and replication server on premises, or we can use object storage to scale that out from a capacity tier. And we can also go and build out things to leverage like S3 Glacier and Deep Archive for longer term data retention. So if I look at this scale out backup repository that I've called Sober01, we can see what makes up this scale out backup repository. So I have a local backup repository that has a capacity of 500 gig. I have an object storage backup repository that's leveraging S3, and then I have an archive object storage tier that's using Amazon Glacier. Now I can define policies to protect all my data across these two different types. So if I look here, the first one is our performance tier, so that's my local tier. I want to keep backups that I take of my workloads locally for a set number of days, so that if I need to do a restore, it's local to those hosts, so I can recover it pretty quickly. Then I have what's called the capacity tier, so I can leverage my different object storage backup repositories that I've created to extend the capacity of that. So what I actually do is I define a policy here to And you can mix and match these. So you can turn this off, you can turn it on, whatever you want to do. So what I'm actually saying is when I take a backup of any workload and store it on my local backup repository, I then want to copy that workload out to my object storage as soon as it's created. So I take a backup, I store that backup on my local object storage, local backup repository, and then as soon as it's finished creating, I copy that to object storage out in AWS S3. So I now have 2 copies of my data created automatically. Then what I say is after 7 days, I want to move my backups off that local object storage, local backup repository, and just store them in object storage. Now, why do I want to do that? Well, obviously local storage is quite expensive. If you're using like expensive storage arrays or network attached storage, stuff like that, then we can move that so that we're only leveraging object storage to store those backups. And then we have our archive tier, which specifies that after 90 days, any backups that I have in object storage after 90 days will be automatically moved to the archive tier. Now, again, why would we do that? Well, that allows us to move all our backups to object storage, excuse me, and then after 90 days, archive them to our Amazon Glacier. That significantly lowers our storage cost. So depending upon your regulations and requirements for compliance, maybe you're like a healthcare provider and you have to keep patient data for 7 years. Well, after 90 days, I can move that to S3 Glacier or S3 Glacier Deep Archive, and then it stays there and it lowers our storage costs. Now, of course, there's some caveats around that, that if I need to restore any data from that, my RTOs have increased because I actually have to pull that data back from the archive tier to an object storage platform. But for any data that we need to keep for long term, it significantly lowers our costs. And Sam's always an expert in costs and mathematics and can always tell you about the price of what Glacier is versus Glacier Deep Archive. He loves his cost calculators and that kind of thing, but it significantly lowers our costs. The other thing that we're able to do is define things like immutability. So we can specify that we want to protect our backups that are moved to object storage and essentially mark them so we can't actually delete any of that data that's stored for a set number of days. So this uses S3 object lock. And what we're actually saying is when we turn this option on, any backup that we take that gets dropped into this particular object storage bucket cannot be deleted, cannot be modified, cannot be edited in any way for this 30-day period. So this is very powerful when we're talking about ransomware or any kind of malicious insiders, you know, rogue admins who've just lost their job and still know the passwords and try and go and delete the backups. They can't do that once we set this immutable option. And all we do here is we simply add an object storage bucket that has the object lock turned on in S3 to a scale-out backup repository. Anything that we add in there is automatically protected. So again, we just look at our capacity tier. So any backups that I drop onto this Sober 02 have the object lock turned on for 30 days. So it's very powerful from that perspective. Now, the other thing that we can do is we can go and edit any of our policies that are running natively in that cloud platform. So we can see here that we have a policy defined here. This is my production priority policy. I can pick any AWS account. So remember in AWS, for example, it's always recommended to have multiple AWS accounts to separate your production data from your backup data. And we have the capabilities to specify different workloads. I'm obviously protecting just a single instance here, but I can define tags if I want to just use tags to automate my backup policies. I can protect all resources in specific regions if I want to. I can turn on application aware backup. So if you're using Windows, for example, in AWS, you can use the SSM agent, which uses the volume shadow service in Windows. I can do pre and post scripts for Linux and Windows as well. And then I can also replicate my snapshots to different regions. So I can say, okay, I have this backup, this workload. I want to replicate a snapshot from my source region, which is Oregon, to a different AWS account in a different region. So again, going back to that 3-2-1 rule, I'm actually protecting, copying my data across different regions, across different media types, storing it in object storage, storing it in deep archive, and I'm also replicating snapshots across different accounts to different regions as well to make sure that I have lots of copies of my data in the event that, say, Oregon region is lost or there's a problem with S3 in that particular region. I can recover from different regions, different media types to different instances as well in different platforms. I have the ability to define different schedules. So I can say I want to take a replica at these times. I want to take backups and offload these to object storage at different times as well. So everything that you expect that you see in Veeam backup and replication, you can also do natively in AWS, Azure, and so on. What's really cool as well is we have what's called a cost estimator. So we can see how much it's going to cost us to protect this particular workload. So we can see that I'm going to spend $1.40 on snapshots. I'm going to spend $1.16 on replicas. I'm going to spend 81 cents a month on my backups. And then when I archive it, it's going to cost this. And it also shows you traffic and transaction costs. Because remember, everything you do in AWS, there's a cost associated with it. So if you're moving data across regions, you're doing lots of transactions across S3, there's a cost. So we can see that this backup policy costs me $4.85 a month to implement. So again, very powerful from that perspective. We have all our different instance types. So I can go and protect RDS, I can go protect EFS, and I can also protect my configurations. So when we talk about how you need to protect those workloads and associated components with them, if I look at this, for example, in my VPC, I can look at some of the components in my different accounts that actually provide the capabilities for those workloads. So if I just turn on my changed attributes, you can actually do a compare about what's changed from your latest backup to your production. But we can see here that I can protect my DNS, I can protect my IP ranges, my DHCP options, all those kind of things. And if I go to this latest restore point, although there's no changes detected, I can actually pick what I want to restore. So I can just say restore, pick my VPC, and then I can break that down. Do I want to restore to the same AWS account, different AWS accounts, or an AWS account that doesn't even exist? And then I can go through restore to new location. So I can actually recover all my VPC configurations to different regions if I want to, different availability zones and so on. And I can specify how I want to replicate those. So I can recover any or all of my VPC configurations along with recovering my particular workloads as well. And we're able to do that natively. Just if you're an AWS customer, you can go and purchase like Veeam Backup for AWS from the marketplace, same with Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure from the marketplace. Or you can, as we've been talking about, manage that centrally through Veeam Backup and Replication through our backup infrastructure, where we can look at our managed servers and we can see that I have like AWS, Azure, vSphere, and so on, all managed natively through a single pane of glass. So with that, I'm going to finish with that demo and I'm going to hand it back to Sam.
Awesome. Apparently, I love numbers so much, so maybe we can talk about that and the list prices of specific services. I won't bore you all to death with that, I promise. However, I think it is a good opportunity to go and answer some questions that we've seen come in. So, good question from Robert, David. Basically, he has a need to back up both VMs and files separately. He currently backs up VMs on-prem and in cloud using Veeam and the scale-out backup repository that you showed to looks like some S3 compatible storage. However, the files looks like they go directly to cloud storage using MSP 360. When will we offer a file backup solution similar to MSP 360?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So all our backups can be stored locally on different types of storage, direct attached storage, stands, NAS appliances, and then we can offload that data to object storage as well. I'm not quite, yeah, I don't fully understand the question, to be honest. MSP 360, we have support for Microsoft Office 365, which you can leverage object storage for as well. So maybe you can post in the questions a follow-up and give a bit more details around what you want.
Cool. One of the other questions, oh, looks like he's clarified. Object storage.
File storage, yeah, but object storage is where we store all the backups. If you want to do granular recovery of those, if you want to pass me it back, Sam, I can show that.
Sure, 2 seconds.
I think what you mean is you want to actually recover individual files rather than go and restore a whole VM or something. And that's very easy as well. So hopefully you can see this again. So for example, if I right click on this backup of this particular VM, I have a number of options. I can restore the entire VM. I can restore VM files, which is the files that actually make up the virtual machine, or I can actually go and restore guest files. Now you can do this in Veeam backup and replication for your on-prem backup. You can do this in AWS, for example. And what it actually does is you just click on this and you say, I want to take this backup, and it'll take a little while to set up and it will be done before this presentation's finished. But this allows you to have granular recovery of those backups. So what you can do is you see here, you get a browser and it'll actually give you like an explorer view, and you can go in and recover those individual files from that, and then you can restore those back to wherever you want. Hopefully that answers your question. So you can see here, for example, there's no real user data here, but I can go in, I can go pick an administrator, I can go to the desktop, and I can recover an individual file. So if you're protecting a file server or anything like that, then you can recover individual files directly from those backups and restore them wherever you want. So hopefully that answers your question, Robert.
Awesome. Let us know in the Q&A if you need further clarification on that one, Robert. Happy to help. Another question is around licensing and around the modular approach. Ultimately, we have something called the Veeam Universal License, and that can pretty much license everything within the Veeam portfolio, the Veeam platform. So not only do we provide you with that technological capability to move, like protect data at its source, move it to different infrastructures or locations, and then continue to protect it when it's landed at that destination. Because it's all centrally managed by Veeam Backup and Replication, and Veeam Backup and Replication is the license server, it just as it sees that you stop protecting it at one, it automatically pulls the license away from that, and it will apply it to the different component or module of our platform to protect it at its destination. So hopefully that answers that question. But ultimately, you don't have to go out and procure new licenses on your software from Veeam. You don't have to, launch license support tickets or even go into any sort of interface and start managing those licenses. They just dynamically move with the workloads within the Veeam platform. So it makes it ultimately very easy for you. Looks like we've got. Okay, it looks like Rowan's going to ask offline. Yeah, shoot myself or David a question offline, Robert. If you like, you can always just reply to the invite, and that always makes its way to myself and David, so we can answer the question further there. Other question, a cynic just like me. Okay, so we're talking about essentially the question's asking, okay, we're helping stop. We're preventing platform lock-in, but aren't we just locking it into Veeam's own platform? It's a really good question. The actual answer is no. So David actually mentioned earlier about the self-describing VBK format. So it's self-describing, right? We actually have free tools on Veeam as well. So that data stored in backups is always yours. So even if you choose to stop being a Veeam customer, we have, is it called the extract utility, David?
Is, yeah.
Yeah, we have Veeam extract utility that you can download directly from veeam.com, and you can access anything and everything within that backup. And we also have Veeam Community Edition. Community Edition ultimately allows you to protect 10 instances, but there are no limitations on recovery. So you've also got that free option as well to continue to have access to all of your data in your backups, even if you decide to not be a Veeam customer. So, ultimately our mantra is this, it's your data. You do what you want with it. Veeam isn't gonna sit here and prescribe to you, you should put data here, you should put data there. That's up to your organization to decide what's best for that. We just want to provide you with the best tools to protect data wherever it resides. Again, best in class tools wherever it resides. Move it, always access it. It's up to you. That's what Veeam does. So it looks like we have no more questions. So we'll kind of start bringing it to a close there. As always, we want to say thank you for joining us on this webinar today. Hopefully this gives you, a good shining light into, the challenges that you're seeing with hybrid cloud backup aren't just limited to you. Everyone faces them. There is, certain things that can help you get on top of this and manage it a lot better and retain ownership of your data, even if you are putting it in someone else's data center, aka the public cloud. And Veeam can help out there. Anyone that's on Veeam Universal License can try all of this instantly with Veeam Backup and Replication. Of course, we always have trials available as well, so you could download a Veeam Backup and Replication trial, utilize those keys to protect stuff on premises, in the cloud, whatever it might be. So strongly encourage you to get hands-on if you are interested in doing so. Looks like we've got another question come in from Jeff. Can we send the video to you? Absolutely, we can, Jeff. So yeah, that brings us to a close. Thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you on a webinar soon.
Thank you very much.